NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
So today, we didn't talk about it last time, but I figured today we would start with a land acknowledgement because we're joining from different virtual spaces, probably, I'm assuming from across different states, across our country. I'd like to acknowledge the different lands that we are joining from today. So for us, land acknowledgements is a way of showing respect and honoring the original caretakers of the land on which we work and live. So here's an example of a land acknowledgement that I pulled up. It actually comes from the Division of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement from Rutgers University, an institution I used to work at that's near and dear to my heart because I'm located in New Jersey at this moment. So we acknowledge that the land on which we stand on is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. We pay respect to Indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora, past, present, and future, and honor those who have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. We want to acknowledge that New Jersey and the United States as a nation were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of Indigenous people. And we also acknowledge that the roots and history of Indigenous caretakers of this land who pioneered restorative justice work. If you want to know what type of land you are on, I will go ahead and throw this in the chat. So really quick, let me send you this website right at the bottom of the presentation. You can visit that website and put your zip code in. It's really quick, or you can simply, if you are a texter, text savvy, you can go ahead and text your zip code to that number to find out what land you currently on. And I also would encourage you, this is a good place, I would say, to start with a land acknowledgement, but it's definitely not a place to stop. So just maybe you want to self-reflect on a commitment you want to make and actions you want to take for steps for acknowledging our original caretakers of the land and people that really were excluded and erased from history. So across the country, there are about 200, I believe, tribal nations that are still fighting for recognition from the US government. And there are currently a little over 500 that are already federally recognized tribal nations. So there's just a little bit of history for you. And if you would like to, in the chat, to throw in what land you're actually on, if you actually clicked on that website. And if you want to throw that in the chat while we are going to transition to the next slides. Okay, we have Abenaki, thank you. All right, so while you're looking that up, I'll go ahead and transition to the next slide. And I want to go ahead and talk about what today's focus will be. We have 2 hours, probably not enough time, as always, to talk about RJ. We could talk about this all day. We recognize that RJ is more like an umbrella or a constellation with complexities and nuance. It takes many shapes and can lead to various conversations. But today we want to focus on these key things. We want to recap from our last session. It's been a while, it's been about 4 months, and a lot of life has happened since then. So we'll recap what we talked about, and for those who missed it, of what RJ is and what it's not in terms of an introduction and some principles. We'll give you a little bit more RJ goodness and information. Hopefully we'll be able to take some real life applications. A part of your feedback was for us to provide examples, real life applications. So we hope to have done that for you today, for you to engage in that discussion. And if we have time, we'll allow for Q&A. And of course, we have that wonderful feedback that we would love for you to fill out for us. And I also want to acknowledge you might not see examples that directly speak to interpersonal violence, the lane that some of you want to go into in terms of implementing RJ, but we're here to showcase like the beauty of RJ, and there's always a pathway to get to the lane that you want to get into. And that starts with really building relationships and establishing that trust. We can't jump right into an IPV lane without really laying a foundation. and looking at ways how RJ is already being implemented in ways that you may not have thought about up until this moment. So we're hoping to really cultivate that conversation today to really get you all thinking about some different ways we can incorporate restorative approaches. All right. Here we go. So just a reminder though, remember, this is engaging. This is not a one-way street for us. We're all learning together. We love for you to throw some questions in the chat that you may have that come up. If we don't get to it in that moment, just know that we will put it in the parking lot and we'll try to get to it at the end. But you will get your questions answered one way or another. But please engage with us today. Try to keep your cameras on as much as possible. I understand the lunch. You need to take time for yourself. Totally understand that. But this is a collective learning space today, and we're just excited that we're invited back. All right, so the recap from January was really about the definition of RJ. It's really just a different way to respond to crime or harm. What we use those terms interchangeably. It's a voluntary process. We also addressed the assumptions of RJ, what it is and what it's not. And that really gets at really just looking at how RJ is not a slap on the wrist. It's not an adversarial process. We're centering the needs of survivors and victims and impacted parties that were caused by harm, and really looking at whose needs, how are they harmed, who was harmed, and what did they need in that moment. Principles of RJ we discussed. We talk about inclusive decision-making. This is one of the very few processes that takes both folks that have caused harm and have been impacted harm. We put them together and say, hey, there's an accountability that's taken place. There's a voluntary process to acknowledge the harm that was done and to actually say, let's try to figure out how we can work together to make things as right as possible, to do right by that person, or how we impacted and affected them and kind of changed some things in their life. We talked about repairing harm and rebuilding that trust. I kind of alluded to that earlier. Without trust, without establishing those relationships, we can't get to the lane and the work we want to do. And we also talked about restorative justice as a paradigm shift, completely taking away and thinking about a different total way of thinking and living, right? We were focused as justice as a punishment, where now we're looking at ways of justice as in doing right by someone. And once again, getting after relationships in that regard. And then we also broke down with our scenario last time with our young person, a criminal legal approach versus a restorative approach. These are the questions that we continue to ask. We're very familiar with the left side. Who did what rule and what law was broken, who actually did it, and how are they going to be punished? Whereas restorative approaches are looking at really figuring out what happened, who was harmed, what do they need, whose obligations to meet those needs, and what are the causes and what's the appropriate process. That last question, what is the appropriate process, I would argue, could actually be put on the left side as well, because we know folks coming from different backgrounds that are working in the legal system, they actually do ask the question of what is the appropriate process. However, I believe a restorative approach takes it a little bit further in that regard. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Okay, so that's good. Perfect. I'm just making sure I'm trying to monitor the chat. Bobby, you got my back in terms of the chat, just in case someone comes up. All right. So, Bobby, this is you.
Thanks, Avery. Hi, everybody. Just FYI, I switched my view to side-by-side gallery so that I can see the slides and see all of you as well. And I invite folks to do that if that's something that you would like. And it will also say so that we can feel like we're part of a group, but only if you're comfortable. Feel free to turn on the video. And plus, if I ever go to play poker with you, that way I'll be able to learn your tells, which I can't do with the camera off. So one of the criticisms that I sometimes have of RJ is it oversells itself. And it suggests, well, if we just did RJ, everything would be kumbaya and there would be no harm and strife in the world. And of course, that isn't true. There are going to be bad outcomes. And even in places that have robust, widespread RJ applications, there are bad outcomes. And I encourage all of you, as you think about implementation, don't be shy about saying that. Because if you overpromise and something bad happens, then there's a backlash. And we're already starting to see that in media reports. So every time I've ever testified on justice reform issues, I've said there will be bad outcomes. We are human beings. The question, though, is, will there be a net improvement in public safety? Will this change bend the arc in a positive way? So as it relates to RJ, there are some specific things that research is showing us. And I want to put in a plug right now for colleagues of Avery and mine at the National Center on Restorative Justice, who are launching a national and actually international research group to further develop study of the pros and cons of RJ. But 3 significant benefits captured on this slide, and we'll make the slides available so that you have access to the site, to locations of the article. First of all is recidivism. I don't know how many of you have spent time in correctional facilities one way or the other, but it shouldn't be too shocking to know that incarceration is a criminogenic risk factor. Sending people to jail increases the risk that they're going to go back again. It's not a good place for change, at least not a good place for positive change. Robust restorative justice programs lower recidivism rates, reduce the likelihood that people are going to reoffend. All right. Second, victim satisfaction, harmed party satisfaction. Even with the really important development of the victims' rights movement that give victims some voice in the criminal legal system, it's still a fairly narrowly constrained voice. I tried really hard 15 years as a DA to listen to victims, but everything that they said, it got filtered through the rules and the law and the procedure. And RJ takes, as Avery mentioned, as we'll look at some more today, a fundamentally different approach, centering the response on that harmed party and on the harm itself. It doesn't mean the rules are unimportant. Of course, they're important. It doesn't mean there's no room for state response. Of course, there'll be a state response. It's just a different focal point at the outset. And lastly, financial impact. I do an exercise with my law students, and we take a simple misdemeanor case, and from the time of incident through trial, we assume a conviction and through sentencing, and do a walkthrough person by person for how many people touch that case. And it is between 20 and 30 people who touch the case when you go through admin and sergeant review and administrative offices in the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office. That's not even including the 50 plus jurors who get called in if the case go to trial. Many of those people are state actors. They are government funded positions. That's taxpayer dollars. RJ reduces the number of people involved and significantly reduce overall costs. I'm convinced that's maybe one of its strongest selling points. When the fiscal conservatives appreciate that this is less costly and yet yields better public safety outcomes, I think that becomes a really strong selling point. So there's an increasing body of research to support the anecdotal evidence that says better outcomes through RJ. Avery, do you want to add anything here?
Nope, you're rolling.
Okay, so let's roll on. And one of the things that you all asked for were applications. And there is a tendency among prosecutors and others to think that RJ is a program that exists to respond to particular, typically low-level crimes. And it is that, but it's more than that. It's a philosophy. It is also a way of engaging with others. And in many respects, the better place to start using RJ is to build community. And once people learn to engage in community, then discussions about harm become less daunting. If you dive right in to a discussion about harm, particularly significant interpersonal harm, it's like trying to run a marathon as your very first event. So we have a a video that is going to show you an application of RJ completely separate and apart from any particular incident, but one I'm pretty sure you will see pays substantial dividends in the overall relationship of folks engaged in community and the criminal legal system.
The badge, law enforcement, it represented something very negative, something very violent. As a child, the only time you see these people is when they come to take things, and you see them and you greet them as the takers, the conquerors. As a Black male dealing with law enforcement, we feel this way. We knew that that badge meant something bad could happen to someone that we cared about.
So the conflict that exists between our African-American, Black and brown community members and law enforcement is not new. It's been happening for the last several hundreds of years. And yet it's so highlighted right now through the media. These tensions can have life or death consequences. And so we felt that it was really important to bring young Black and brown youth together with cops.
I look at it like it's just too much misjudging going on and judging a lot of books by their covers and not noticing what people really have came from. Have you feeling right where I'm even going?
I've been that person stopped by the police, and I've been that person that felt, like justice was just not right, or my treatment versus that it was not right.
They tend to judge, like everybody judge. And when I felt misunderstood is when the police didn't really allow me to talk.
The citizens have to be retrained, and so does law enforcement. And saying retraining is just changing our way of thinking. Once you've had more positive experience than negative, and you learn not to live off of the stereotypes, then you can make some real headway.
Things didn't begin to change for me until my freshman year of college. I got into a really nasty car accident. It was cold, it was raining. A police officer showed me. I'm sitting there, I'm crying, I'm in tears, and I'm just distraught. He showed me so much compassion. And he went above and beyond and stood there with me. He didn't have to sit in the rain with me with his arm over me. He just saw a human being, and it was just like this great angel. And we became brothers in that moment. For me, this happened this negative encounter my entire life with the badge. And this one occasion opened my eyes.
I think there may be only two groups in the United States that actually can understand each other. One, Black young people. Two, the police. If to both sides, it seems that the world is misunderstanding them. It's a good time to say, you know what? Let me open my heart up a little bit and listen to the pain of the law enforcement community. Listen to their fear. Listen to their sense of being labeled and wrong and misunderstood. Or let me listen to those African-American kids. They can't take off their badge, they can't take off their uniform, but they still feel like they've got a target on their back because of their skin color.
And so what better opportunity to bring those groups together to address these challenges and come up with positive solutions and building relationships. So what have you guys heard about this thing we're doing tonight? You haven't heard anything? No, you don't know anything yet. They're hoping to affect some change by building some relationship between police officers and community. To witness these dialogues is truly a miracle, because you can feel the tension and sense that dynamic that exists. So much resistance for both of these groups coming together. And within the first half an hour, we're introducing ourselves and playing a game and kind of unpacking these ideas that keep those groups separate. And to see the bonding and the laughter and the understanding and the forgiveness and the tolerance that emerges for both of these groups is something that is so inspiring to observe and to witness. It gives all of us a lot of hope for moving this conversation and these relationships forward.
I would redefine my role as a police officer, recognize that my job wasn't just to arrest people. My job was to provide services and to be a social worker and to be a role model. And so I think when you redefine the role of law enforcement, you'll start to see a change in the community. You'll start to develop trust.
I was actually invited to participate in this dialogue, and it broke down barriers that I didn't even realize still existed with me as a deputy sheriff. That session really opened my eyes, and it was something that I realized that the Marshall County Sheriff's Office needed to embrace.
I've been thinking a lot about an expression I heard, and it's the transformative power of small gestures. I think people who are interested in reform think really big and sometimes get bogged down in the vastness of that vision. And little things can begin to make a huge difference. And I'm not suggesting that police community dialogue is a little thing, but it isn't perhaps as daunting as dramatic overhaul of sentencing practices within a county. And so hopefully this video has given you an example of how dialogue and allowing for inclusive voices begins to change the way people interact with each other. And I'll just, if anyone has any observations, thoughts, comments in the chat, or feel free to unmute and share your thoughts. And anyone, if not,
That's okay.
that's
We'll
okay.
keep going along. That's
Yeah.
totally fine. Some more people coming in to the space.
Hello, this is Tina. I have an experience I can share.
Please do, Tina.
I was gonna put it in a chat, but I don't type that fast. I was gonna say, I'm the product of a positive interaction with a police officer and how it can change your perspective. I grew up in a neighborhood where the police deliberately terrorized the community. They were deliberately mean. So I grew up fearing them and not wanting anything to do with them. In my young 20s, I worked at a store. I'll get to the point real quickly. Just had a positive interaction with one police officer with that same agency. Started having dialogue and conversation with just that one, and that one police officer's attitude, being able to relate to me, being able to understand. He also was an African-American male, so talked about some of his experiences. And not did that just change me. I am in law enforcement today, and I will tell you, I would have never, ever looked at that career if it had not been for that one officer.
Talk about the transformative power of small gestures. I mean, what started as dialogue seems to have dramatically influenced the entire course of your career.
Yeah, he actually convinced me to start doing some volunteer work because I'm bilingual. I spoke Spanish, and at the time, the Hispanic Latino community was growing in our community. And so it started with dialogue, come volunteer, and then I got hooked.
That's great. I had never thought about what Van Jones's comments were about why there actually could be this natural bond between law enforcement and disenfranchised folks who get marginalized and stigmatized. I just think that's such a fascinating and brilliant concept. Avery, I think I will pass to you.
Was it me?
You're back.
Of
Good.
all things?
Yes.
Never had that happen. I always really dread me being that person. And oh my gosh.
May I just tell you, my pulse and heart rate just went up dramatically at the notion that you were leaving us.
Holy smokes, that
And-
was wild. Okay,
And
sorry, y'all.
we don't see the slides. There
We're
we go.
back. We back?
Great, good. And I've passed to you. I don't know when we
Okay,
lost you.
I missed Tina. Thank you so much for sharing. I got cut out. But thank you for opening up your personal story of hearing about your experience and why you're in law enforcement to this day. Like, really appreciate that. And then I also saw in the chat that I don't even see anymore that someone was saying this is an idea or another way to think about RJ that they weren't even thinking about before. A great introduction. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. When we talk about RJ, it's really about getting after relationships. It's as simple start as it can be, right? Like when we are in community with each other, there's so many benefits that can happen out of that, right? Of just coming from a place of understanding and just listening to one another. Gosh, how much would we give right now for folks to just listen to each other as opposed to just being at odds right now. So I really appreciate that perspective. Was there anything else that I missed from my brief time away?
We missed you, but I think you captured it well.
All right, perfect. Let me keep rolling. Okay. Uh-oh. Let's do that again. Okay. So now that you've seen that video, we kind of wanted to break down a little bit more deeper today, the different types of harm that can be experienced when we're talking about RJ or just in general. I think our good colleague, friend that was with us for the first session, Lindsay Pointer, I believe we started the day off doing an activity where folks were able to identify needs after recognizing when harm was caused to them. But I want to go a little bit deeper today and talk about the different types of harm that can be experienced. So let's start with emotional. We can almost certainly easily, or this is primarily be able to identify these type of emotions pretty quickly. We're talking about the feelings we may experience when something was done to us. So like I said, with that needs-based activity we did, we saw responses and experiences like, hey, yeah, in that moment when something was done wrong to me, I felt unheard, all right? I felt a level of anger. Sometimes there's a level of shame that's associated with something that was done. Feeling voiceless, feeling disregarded, thrown away. I think in society, we, for the most part, I would say, can do a pretty good job identifying those feelings in that moment. But then we go a little bit deeper in terms of peeling back their layers when we're talking about harm. Being able to identify the material aspect of harm, that too can get a little easy, right? It's easy to identify when your car was stolen, right? The type of money. We can easily identify, right? I no longer have a car. I'm out of a car, and now I'm having to cough up more money, whether it's a rental or buying a new car or the repairs that were needed because it was damaged in the process, right? Or the time that it took for me to take out of my busy schedule that's already happening to address something that was unforeseen. But I don't think we actually talk about, sometimes there's research that really talks about the physical body ailments that can come from material harm or even a mental health aspect, right? Understanding what it means to be stressed or experiencing anxiety as a result of something that was caused, harm that was caused to you. Experiencing something physical like a migraine or some type of physical ailment that is associated with the harm that was caused due to someone else. And like I said, we'll peel back the layer more and really talk about communal harm. What's the relationship like to that individual when that happens? So when someone caused harm, what, in terms of the person that's responsible for that harm, what relationship did they have to that community? Were they a friend? Or did they have a dynamic? Was there a family dynamic that played a role? Was it, a daughter to a mother, or was it a cousin or anyone in their family? Did they belong to a certain organization, right? Or a church, maybe even a church? The violation within that community that you belong to also can occur. So helping understand what the relationship is to the community in that regard. And then the last piece is what I've been seeing recently from some RJ practitioners, really doing some good work in this area, identifying the structural historical component of harm. What does it look like when, how does it play a larger role in society, right? What are those stereotypes and assumptions that are already associated with this? And now that it's happened, we've intensified that assumption even more. Yeah, because the harm that was caused, and even system structures, and looking at the overall bigger picture of how it shows up in our society. All right. So Howard Zare, who wrote the little book of restorative justice, he pretty much, this is what he's credited to framing how what's created out of when harm and crime is done. So harm and crime is a violation of interpersonal relationships, right? You did something to me, we somehow had a relationship that happened, there was a violation of trust that happened, something happened that was caused and done to myself or that relationship. Out of that were obligations that needed to be created. Out of those violations, there were there are needs that are created. And out of those needs are obligations. So as much as possible, making things right after causing that harm. When someone does something to me, it creates obligations to make that right. And we're all talking about relationships in that regard. Other thing I want to pull up is a social discipline window, right? When we're really talking about when a concept that describes 4 basic approaches to maintaining the social norms and boundaries. It breaks down both high and low control and support. So when someone does something to me, right, in my response, I can do something to them back, right? That's a more punitive approach. When I don't do something back to them, am I being neglectful? Am I just letting it slide? All right, they did something, I'm gonna let it go at this point. Even more so, you move over and say, when somebody does something to me and I have an opportunity for a response, maybe I'm gonna let it slide. And then I'm also gonna take it a next step and be permissive and say, well, you know what, that person had a bad day. So I'm gonna let it slide, because of that bad day. Or they had a loss in their family or something happened to them, so I'm letting it go. I think the best approach, right, when we are truly being restorative, is when when they're doing things with each other. When you're putting folks in the room, when you're taking someone and saying, hey, being able to name it and say, this is how harm was caused to me, allowing that person to take ownership and working together to figure out how to make things as right as possible during that time. Right? That is a concept that we're looking to. Not doing something to them, not excusing it, not giving them permission to do it, but really getting at the root of the issue and working together to figure this thing out. All right. If you didn't get that, I got an example for us that we can talk about. So I hope that everybody knows what I'm referencing. If not, you'll be able to after I briefly explain it. But for the sake of the chat and engaging folks, can you all let me know that you at least understand and recognize who Will Smith and Chris Rock is in the incident that took place about a month ago at the Academy Awards? Somebody give me a nod, a chat. If you don't know, put a note. Yes. Great. It's a yes. I think everyone, whether you are, for the most part, if you were in tune, if you're connected socially, if your neighbor was talking about it, if somebody in the office came talking about it, you kind of know what happened. But for the sake of the folks that want to be shy and don't know what happened, really quickly, we have Chris Rock on the right. Both of these men have been in like the film Hollywood industry for a long time. You would even probably coin them both as comedians at this point, actors, but really in the entertainment business. Chris Rock was set to present an award at the Academy Awards this year. And like all comedians that are hired for these type of award shows, they are paid to make jokes, right? To get the folks laughing, to get them engaged. So Chris Rock goes around the room, makes his jokes, and he lands on a joke about Will Smith's wife's hair. Will Smith clearly doesn't appreciate it, and he has actions to basically physically show Chris Rock that he didn't appreciate the joke that day. All right, that's just in a nutshell. I'm not going to play the video. I'm not going to do anything because I'm going to take it that you all have seen this. So that's going to be our real life question today. Bobby's going to explain how we're going to break up into groups and really discuss what happened. So Bobby, while I'm on the back end getting folks involved in their groups, would you mind breaking down what they're actually going to do? And I will stop sharing for the moment, and I'll go ahead and do the back end work. You're muted, Bobby. It's okay. You're muted.
In case anyone was visiting the moon when this incident happened, and just to round it out, Will Smith went on stage and slapped Chris Rock. So our work is largely done. Your work is about to begin. So what you don't know is that Avery is setting up groups. And in a moment, we are going to send you into groups of twos. We're going to have you pair off. And what we really want you to do is think about using this incident. What's the conventional response to what happened? The slap. So how in the traditional criminal justice, criminal legal system would we respond to what happened? And then we'd like you to pivot and think about, well, what's a restorative way to think about what happened? So in the conventional legal response, what law was broken? Who did it? How is the government, the prosecution, going to prove that? And how should Will Smith be punished? I suspect all of you, that comes fairly naturally to go through that analysis. Then we want you to pivot. And we want you, as Howard Zare says, to look at this through a new lens, to change lenses and look at it through a restorative lens. What happened? Who was harmed? And that can be a pretty broad analysis. What do they need? Who has obligations to meet those needs? Are there underlying causes that contributed to this harm? And what process should be used to arrive at an outcome? And I think maybe Avery will post that analysis, but I suspect most of you have a pretty good sense about how to think about this incident conventionally, and then how to think about it restoratively. And we're going to give you, I think, 15 minutes one-on-one to go through that. When that's done, if all goes well, a timer will tell you that time's up. You get a 2-minute break, bio break, stretch break, whatever you like. And then we'll come back and we'll collectively do some debriefing and sharing about the contrasting approaches and what you came up with in your groups. As you're thinking about this, think about what emotional harms were at play. Were there material losses? Collectively, was there harm? Was there communal harm? And what structural systems might have been at play related to this? I like to think that every time there's an incident, it is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to look at a relationship, but it's also an opportunity to look more broadly at what are societal structures that may be contributing. Avery, any further marching orders we should give folks?
No, I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. I will say one thing, for the sake of today and the sake of time. Let's not get caught up in the free speech debate, right? Let's focus on the harms and the needs for today. I know we can go down a full pathway of who's right, who's wrong, but let's just focus on the needs and the harms today and the obligations. How do we make that right? Who and how? Make sense?
Avery, let me just confirm, they will be at 15 minutes, their breakout will...
Yeah, it's
And-
automatically set. I think I've done this right. If I have, everyone will be in a breakout. Bobby and I are staying in the room in case you all need us, but 15 minutes.
And before we send you off, any questions? You didn't know you were going to have to do work, but we got you. So any questions before we send you to your breakouts?
You want me to stop recording now, right?
Yeah, please, so people can be their, true self. Keep moving on. Thank you, Catherine, I appreciate it. So I'm gonna jump through. All right, so this is our last video we're gonna show. Once again, we were committed to giving you more examples of RJ and how to implement it. Like I said, I know PwC is really looking to implement it within the IPV lane. However, there's a journey. So this is Sujatha Baliga. Hopefully you've heard of her. She's an amazing RJ practitioner. Her current work, she works with crime survivors and people who've caused harm. She formerly, I believe, directed the RJ project at Impact Justice, who we all heard from a couple of months ago, which started out in Oakland. Former public defender. So she has the technical skills and understanding and knowledge of the law, has practiced law to understand all the aspects of the legal system, as well as a restorative approach. And I believe she took a sabbatical and is working on a book about forgiveness right now. So waiting for that project to come out, but she's just an amazing person, human being. But in this video, she's talking about a conference she did, a scenario and a case that she worked that had to do with theft. So I'll go ahead and play it. Let's hope the sound is good. Let me know if I need to turn it up or any of things like that.
Case about a stolen car. And we reached out to the young person, and he pretty quickly took responsibility for it, and was very open to meeting with his victim and making it right, and explained that he was really poor, but he was willing to get a job and try to figure out, how to do right by the victim. So we reached out to the victim, and the victim was extremely unhappy that the case had been diverted. She actually knew a little bit about diversion because she worked for a law enforcement type entity, and was adamant that she had been out of pocket $4,000 in costs because of this car, and wanted to see $4,000. And so in meeting with the young person and his family, his mother is undocumented, working multiple jobs. They were living in the most in the kinds of poverty that we just shouldn't have in the United States, with so many other people's children living with them just to have a place to eat. And I knew that this mother and this young man were not coming up with $4,000. And so the person I was training at the time asked me, so are we going to send the case back? Because there's no way this woman's getting what she wants. So I go back to her and I say, would you have any interest in doing this, even if $4,000 might not be the outcome? Is there some other reason to do this? And she brought a friend with her that day, and he said, I would really love for you to move forward. And she said, I just want to meet with this kid and tell him that what he did wasn't okay. And her friend said, I would really like to meet with this young man too. And so on the day of the conference, it was very powerful. Her supporter, the person who would come with her, at one point, as the youth who'd stolen the car couldn't remember what color the car was, and it became evident that he'd stolen many cars, and the victim is getting angrier and angrier, and you're never going to learn your lesson. And at this point, her friend leans in and he says, I know you. And my heart stopped, because I was like, oh, we usually research these things better, and I had no idea there was a pre-existing relationship between these two parties. And he says, I know you because I used to be you. And he proceeds to tell the most powerful story about how he himself got caught up in stealing cars, and it derailed his life, and how he got his life back on track. And it was as if the rest of the room disappeared, and this young man and this man who turned his life around engaged in a dialogue about how does one turn one's life around. And he says, you have to stop hanging out with your homies in the way that you used to, but don't cut them out of your heart. Just don't include them in every aspect of your life. So you show up for the baptism, but you don't stay for the after party, right? And you always say, I got to get to work, and they respect that. So so what makes you happy? What do you believe in, about yourself? Or what are you good at? And the kid pops up and he says, I'm a really good artist. And his mother starts laughing. And she says, you can't pay this woman back $4,000 with your art. And just then the victim jumps in and she says, oh, yes, he can. Yes, he can, actually. She was so moved by this dialogue, right? That she says, if he paints me a Tinkerbell as tall as I am, it's like she's about 5 feet tall, as tall as I am, I'll forgive all the debt. And we're all looking at each other like, a Tinkerbell? I'm sorry, did she say Tinkerbell? So I start taking notes and she's describing the exact Tinkerbell and what color the Tinkerbell needed to be. And it had to be an old school one without too much cleavage. So she's very particular about the Tinkerbell. And the kid is really excited, but he's also like, I don't know how I would canvas and what she's describing. And I'm like, we'll find you a community artist person who will help you with this. And so I was thinking of my friend Evan, who I knew would definitely be interested in doing this. And so ultimately, the young man does paint this. And just within a few weeks, he got a job, raised enough money for all the art supplies. He wanted to do it himself. Painted the most amazing rendition of Tinkerbell on canvas, and the victim asked him to bring it to her home and help him install it. And then he ended up getting involved with other community art projects and actually getting involved in the program at Community Works, where he had been involved in this case, and just helping out other kids who'd gotten in trouble. So his life turned around completely, and he stayed out of trouble consistently after that. And the Tinkerbell was really beautiful. But I think what's really, when people ask what do victims want, it's different in every case. And I always think you never know, it might be Tinkerbell. Like, you have no idea what is going to leave a crime victim satisfied. So some people might say, oh, that's soft on crime. He stole a car and he gets to paint something. But if that's what the victim wanted, and that's what keeps him out of trouble for the rest of his life, then we should be really happy about Tinkerbell.
Okay.
We received a case about.
All right. So I will stop sharing my screen. Any thoughts from that video that came up? I figured let me throw this video out there. Just a reminder on the importance of relationships and centering the needs of victims and survivors, right? Like, we don't know what folks need in that moment without involving them in the process. So that is a clear reminder. It might be $4,000 to you, or it might be some other thing, but it might be something like a Tinkerbell or some other gesture. I wish we all had insight. Like I said, I'm still hoping for the RJ facilitator for the stars, right? To really see, wouldn't it have been cool for the Oscars to release a statement and say, we outsourced this and we're letting them deal with this internally, right? And then if they feel comfortable, they'll share the outcome, right? Wouldn't it be cool to know what Chris Rock decided? And I would put all the other folks that may have been caused harm that day, put their needs in there too, Jada Pinkett. Somehow members of the community that were present that day, right? Like, it might, it would definitely render a different outcome. And I think that would begin to kind of permeate and cause a ripple effect. So the impact of what this approach can lead to. I like wholeheartedly believe that. So we're going to leave this time for questions. Anything that you're taking away from this moment. But before we do go into questions, I want to remind folks, Catherine probably is going to remind you by email, June 3rd, if you want to continue to hear more from me, because I know I get chatty. We're doing a webinar based on the article that was sent out. And then, as usual, we'll be throwing some feedback out there to you all to really hear about how today went for you all. But in the meantime, we want to wind down for Q&A.
So I have a question. This is Tracy. In the models that you all are familiar with and that you have documented or worked with in the past, where does who holds who determines what the victim wants and needs? Like, where does that go back to? Like, is it the folks that are providing services for the victim? Is it is it the people that are theoretically the advocates, the victim witness folks? Is it the people that are making charging decisions? Like, I'm sure that there's not a single answer to this. I'm really curious, what have other restorative justice programs done? Like, who's in the, who's making those decisions? Who's figuring that out?
It's the facilitators that have been assigned to the case, right? They are working with all the parties that are involved. So they're working with the person who's caused harm. They're working with the folks that have been impacted by the harm and all of the supports that come with those folks that were directly involved in the incident. They're doing that. Like I said, this is not easy work. They're taking time and doing a lot of intense pre-work. And during that pre-work are all of these questions that I just simply asked you all. You know, what happened? How has this harmed you? What are some things that need to be made right in you for you to be made whole, right? Going through the person that has caused harm to really go through and hear their narrative of what happened and how they did things and who do they think they affected along the way. All of that pre-work is done, and you are coming up with a clear set of needs during that time, right? By the time you're like bringing these folks together in dialogue and through conferencing, they're not hearing this stuff for the first time. Through that pre-work, there is communication that's going back and forth about, okay, I've now met with this person that has caused harm, that stole that car. This is what they were thinking at the time. Now, you might have heard that during the pre-work, but there is something different about getting face-to-face and hearing it from them that really is a powerful time to hear someone take ownership and responsibility for something they did and what was going in their mind during that time. But yes, the prep is happening and the facilitators are driving those conversations and facilitating those questions that need to get answered in order to move forward to see if that's a process that could be done.
But
so I hope I answered that.
Of course, that doesn't happen unless and until the case gets to a facilitator.
Mhm.
So that's going to be typically a prosecutor is making that decision. I think increasingly we will see direct referrals from law enforcement to RJ community-based programs. And I absolutely think there's a role for defense attorneys through things like the defense initiated victim outreach to talk to harmed parties, especially where prosecutors are not doing a good job with that, to draw out what a harmed party really wants and needs.
But I also think like we have the questions that you typically ask. Who did it? What happened? What rule was broken? I don't think it costs much for a prosecutor or someone that has first gotten the case to simply reframe the question to just ask what happened and what was the harm that was caused, right? Like it doesn't cost too much of us to ask what needs do you have in this moment, right? And how will we get those needs met? Like just to simply ask, what do you need now that this thing has happened to you?
Yeah, no, and I don't mean that to sound like I haven't been paying attention all along.
No. I know.
I'm actually in a practical place right now. I'm in a practical place where we have the people in the room that we have the people in the room right now. And we're in a place where my brain's going, where would this come from right now? Because we have law enforcement in this room with us right now. It's awesome. You know, both the city and the county are here, and you've got community stakeholders in the church. And but I got to figure, in order for us practically to move, I'm thinking about how that, Steve Lee is here from ACTS. Where is that facilitator? And I'm sitting here thinking, well, it's probably in this group located at ACTS or maybe in the church. Like that's where the facilitator would have to come from in this group as we're sitting here right now. So I love what we're doing to try to make sure we're all in the same space and understand what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. And this has been amazing. But I also just practically thinking about where this goes for this jurisdiction, wanted to ask that kind of bald question the way I did it. So I appreciate the answer though.
Tracy, I'm going to throw one other thing out there. I don't know if you've ever heard of the technique known as backcasting. It's very
but I can't think of what that is, Bobby. Can you tell me again?
Yeah. Don't think about right now. Don't even think about this year. Let's go 5 years out. Where do you want this to be 5 years from now? Yeah. What I think you'll find if you assemble a good diverse group of folks, you'll get broader consensus about where you want to be 5 years from now. Once you do that, say, all right, 3 years from now, what steps, where do we have to be to hit that 5-year mark? And then you get to now, what do we have to do over the next year? And it really helps you not get bogged down in the details right away, but develop a shared or collective vision.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes hard for practical people, but it's a really good exercise. And it's a really effective way to bring folks who might not naturally find common ground. It helps them find common ground.
Yeah. Yep. I think I heard that term from you, Bobby, now that I'm thinking
Maybe.
about it,
All right.
maybe 8 or 9 months ago. So I appreciate you reminding me about that.
Tina, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually was thinking about that myself. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe the Vermont educational institution that you're a part of trains facilitators. Is that correct? So there's some training available for that kind of service. And that is something I'm actually interested in the future. But my question is different. My question is about the timing of restorative justice. So is there ever a time when it's too late in the process to add restorative justice, even if a case has been decided and the judge has ruled, because there's still harm that was caused and the victim is still dealing with that?
I would say no. There are current cases, I have to find it and pull it up, but there was, and Bobby, maybe you know, there's been cases that folks have been sentenced for murder and have been serving time, and then there's an opportunity to meet with the families of the victim, and there has been a restorative process that has taken place after currently serving. I know there's a case in Florida that happened, but there's a couple other cases that has taken place.
Yeah, this is Dave. Another on the murder example, Avery. There's a really powerful speaker, and he's out of Milwaukee, out of Wisconsin, and he was a juvenile homicide. And I think the DA's office was trying to, figure out what do you do with it as far as resentencing. And the victim's family came forward. Victim's family actually went and saw him in custody. So it's a really powerful example. And I think he wrote an essay, and I think he wrote that's what it was. He ended up writing an essay, and they published it, and it was the victim's family that read it. And so it's a really good example as you're trying to build this of don't assume anything. That when the victim's family read it, they realized they lost their kid a long time ago, but they didn't want to lose this kid as well, because he was a part of the community. They did know who the killer was. And he's done really well in the community. So we can get you the name, but yeah, never assume. Also, I think on the victim, on the prosecutor side, it's great when the defense gets in on this, especially with the backlogs and everything going on right now, for the defenders on this call to say, hey, let's look at this case differently. I think most of the prosecutors, and I don't want to speak for a particular office, warmly embrace that. That's great. Thank you for that. Let's see if we can't figure this out. And I'd also encourage, I'm going to go back to my police friend there, Tina. Think about the case at the point of an arrest, at the point of an initial contact. Can we do something different with this case that might end up with a better outcome? Because we're always thinking about compared to what, and just the normal processing versus can we do something in the alternative. But I also like the example that we just saw, because initially the victim was not aboard, right? She was not happy about this case being diverted. That's a reality in a lot of prosecutors' offices. Can you walk it through? So I think that's something else to think about. And also don't put too much expectation out there. If the victim won in that case $4,000, it's not. And so most prosecutors' response to the $4,000 is, you're not going to get the $4,000 whether we take it to court or divert it, right? I mean, that's just the reality. It's what's the best thing, and that, I guess, will be the end. When looking at cases in the past, it used to be who scares us, right? It scares us or makes us angry. In this discussion, it's why won't they just stop? And the fact here, I thought our hypo was going to that he did steal other cars, but that's a lot of times with the victims. They just want their car back. They'd like to have a little money to fix it, but they like the car not to get ripped the next day, or as we hear, a whole bunch of smash, car burglaries. Is there any assurance that if we do the restorative process, will they not walk out and see a bunch of glass out on the road in front of their house? So, but this is a great discussion. Thank you for the involvement.
Tina, I would respectfully rephrase your question. And I would ask, is it ever too late from the people most directly affected by the conduct? And that to me feels like an easy, it's never too late. So don't put a label on it that actually some people might balk at. But what's the substance of it? And the substance of it is giving people voice, and it is never too late for that.
That's great. I have a friend who is going through very difficult time. Her son was murdered, and this was in Vermont, and she was waiting for years throughout COVID for the case to come to the judge. And I was wondering during that time, because I know there are restorative justice practices in most counties in Vermont, which is what, I'd heard you say. And I never got the impression that she was offered that, and she did not go through that. And the case was decided a few months ago, and she never had any involvement in it whatsoever. And it was very, very painful for her. And they basically just gave this girl like a slap on the wrist that murdered her son. And I just feel like restorative justice would be so helpful for this person that I know that is in so much pain. And I don't know how to start it, or it would be her decision, but it's also in Vermont. So this woman is in Vermont. So if you have any ideas for me on how to make that happen, I would greatly appreciate it. Like later.
Happy to chat offline.
Yes, and we know we're coming to a close. Thank you for the reminder. But we really appreciate the time you all gave us today. And we look forward to the next session. So I know we're a minute out. It's 3:00. So please enjoy the rest of your day. We look forward to hearing from you. Please fill out the feedback if you have a moment. We'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, all of you guys in Vermont.
Thanks.
And everybody else.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.